Welcome to the Maier Files podcast, unveiling hidden realities.
Some stories aren't meant for a big audience. Some stories find you.
Like a book that falls off the shelf at the right moment. You don't look for it, it looks for you.
That's exactly how it all started. A meeting in a dimly lit bar. A Prussian magician with a secret, and a story too dangerous to tell. Until now.
And it's funny how these stories pull you in. I wasn't part of this at the beginning. I just got curious. I knew Lena from before, and then I came across the Maier Files. And, well, one thing led to another.
And here you are, Bernd, stepping right into the mystery.
Exactly. And the deeper I looked, the more I realized this isn't just a story, it's a door. Once you open it, there's no turning back. But where do stories like this begin? In dusty archives? In lost letters? Or maybe they start in the most unexpected places, like a quiet stopover in Detmold, where a man named Rolf Naumann poured drinks, whispered secrets, and performed small magic tricks.
It all began with my work-related trips to Dresden. But it wasn't in Dresden where I met him. It was a stop in between, in Detmold. At first, it was just a convenient place to rest before continuing the journey. But once you had stepped into Naumann's hotel, something about the place and about him kept pulling you back. His charisma, his storytelling, the way he could turn a simple conversation into something otherworldly.
And his little magic tricks?
Those two, yeah. Anyways, he had a way of pulling you into his world. In the evenings, people gathered in his cozy cellar bar. Some watched his sleight of hand, others listened to his stories. But one night, something changed. Rolf looked at me across the table and said, "I have a story for you. But it's not just any story. It's a secret. And it's been waiting for the right person to hear it."
And that's how it begins.
It started out as just a story. But then it turned into something else entirely. The deeper I dug, the weirder things got. Crazy coincidences, unexpected people crossing my path, books falling into my hands at just the right time. It was like the story was leading me somewhere.
And then I got pulled into it. At first, I wasn't too happy about Pat using my resemblance to Lena Müller from Maier Files. Felt kinda weird, to be honest. But after a while, I stopped caring. Because the real mystery? It wasn't about me. It was the story itself. I found my own connection. Turns out there was a link between Rolf and my grandfather. And I met Pat in Paderborn years ago. But beyond that, no details for the listeners.
Aha, very mysterious, Lena. Aber komm schon, so eine Andeutung und dann nichts. I mean, such a tease, and then you just leave us hanging?
That's Lena for you. Always giving you just enough to wonder, but never enough to sleep at night.
Well, someone has to keep you both on edge.
Ah, so it's intentional psychological warfare? Good to know.
But honestly, do you ever get the feeling that Lena knows more than she lets on?
Always. But I also know better than to push my luck.
Smart man.
But that's the thing, isn't it? The more we pull at the threads, the more tangled it all gets. What if this story didn't find us by chance at all?
Vielleicht waren wir schon immer Teil davon. I mean, maybe we were always part of it, somehow.
Rolf never wanted the full story to be public. It's dangerous, he told me. It's not for everyone.
Not everyone should know.
And now, here we are. The story's out there. But is it history? Or is it something else? Something Still unfolding?
There's something we haven't addressed yet. Something that at first glance makes Maier Files feel less like a historical account and more like, well, something else entirely.
Oh? Go on.
Characters. Gudrun and Holle, for example. They don't age. They don't quite fit into what we'd call reality. They feel, how should I put it, impossible. Yet they're there, and they know things that no one else does.
Are you sure they don't age? Or do they just age differently?
That's what I'm getting at. Are these characters actual people in the story, or could they be something different? It's mentioned that Rolf had psychosis. So, could Gudrun and Holle just be creations of his mind? Maybe they're manifestations of something deep within him?
They say Rolf's mind was shattered. But maybe that's just what we were meant to believe. The world calls it madness when someone sees too much. But what if he wasn't lost in delusions? What if he was speaking a truth too vast, too unsettling to be accepted? His encounters, they weren't just stories. They were glimpses into something beyond the veil.
Or, here's a thought, could they be a metaphor? Take Gudrun, for instance. Might she represent the Geist Deutschlands, the enduring force that refuses to be broken?
That makes sense when you think about it. A story within a story. The deeper layers, the hidden meanings that only reveal themselves to those who look for them.
Or maybe they were deliberately added to the story. A kind of protection. A way to blur the line between reality and fiction. So if anyone came asking questions, demanding answers, we could just say, hey, look, these characters can't be real. It's just a story. Don't take it too seriously.
Plausible deniability? A defense mechanism against retaliation from certain powers?
It wouldn't be the first time history was obscured by layers of myth and legend.
That brings me to another possibility, and it's one I'm hesitant to dismiss outright. What if Gudrun and Holle aren't just convenient storytelling devices? What if they belong to something else? Something outside our normal perception of time and space?
Something interdimensional.
Interdimensional? Or something closer to what the old folk tales described, the unseen world, the world of the elves, the forces that lurk just beyond the veil, stepping in when the balance tips too far in one direction.
If that's the case, then we're looking at a conflict that isn't just political or historical. It's spiritual, maybe even cosmic.
And that brings us to the war beneath the surface. The battle between the House of the Chalice and its opposite, the force tied to Saturn and Ahriman. A force that seeks to sever the ancient connection, to erase what some call the German soul.
A force that doesn't want history remembered, that doesn't want the past connected to the present.
A force that rewrites, distorts and buries.
So, what do we believe? Are Gudrun and Holle just ghosts of Rolf's mind? Are they metaphors? Are they convenient fiction? Or are they something far older, something watching from the edges of history?
Maybe they're all of the above, and maybe that's why the story still lingers.
You know, the weirdest thing? Sometimes when I dig into all this, I get this feeling, like someone or something is watching.
Maybe it is.
Or maybe it's just your mind playing tricks. That's what they always say, right? It's just your imagination.
Here's the interesting thing about imagination, though. It has this knack for bringing to light things that aren't meant to be seen.
And speaking of things not meant to be seen, and yet, something odd keeps happening. You'd think a graphic novel and a podcast are harmless enough, right? A story, just a story.
Then why do we keep facing suppression? Content vanishing from search results. Accounts mysteriously flagged. Shadow banning.
The modern ghost in the machine. the hand that edits reality without leaving fingerprints.
You have to ask yourself, what's so dangerous about Maier Files? A story about the past? Or is it the fact that some elements of this past refuse to stay buried?
Or maybe someone doesn't want them to resurface.
Censorship has always been a silent weapon. And like all weapons, it's never used without a reason.
So, we leave it to you, listeners. Is this all just an algorithm deciding what's acceptable? Or is there another hand at play? After all, suppression often says more about the suppressed than the suppressors.
Some stories find you, but some stories are hidden from you.
Ja, es ist schon verrückt. When you think about it, if this were just some random comic book, why would it be so difficult to find?
Maybe it's not about the books themselves. Maybe it's about where they lead you.
Like Rahn wrote about the Cathars. They were guardians of a knowledge that was never meant to be written, only passed from mouth to ear. Some truths can only be found in the shadows between words.
The Grail isn't an object to be possessed,
but a path to be followed. One that leads beyond the material world.
Weißt du noch, was Rahn über den Diebsweg geschrieben hat? Ich werde immerzu den großen Bären vor Augen haben.
Dieses Sternbild am Nordhimmel trug in alten Zeiten die Namen Arktos oder Artus oder Arthur oder Thor. The ancient path of thieves, guided by the Great Bear constellation.
The thieves' path. In medieval times, it wasn't just about stealing physical objects. Those who walked it were stealing knowledge. Forbidden knowledge.
Knowledge guarded by the powerful.
The name itself was a misdirection. Call something a thieves' path. And who would want to follow it? Only those who understood the code. The path of thieves wasn't for common criminals. It was for those stealing fire from the gods like Prometheus.
And the Dietrich, the skeleton key Rahn mentions carrying.
Not just a tool for opening locks, but a symbol. The key to mysteries hidden in plain sight. Those who walked this path by the light of the Great Bear were seeking entry to realms of knowledge others couldn't imagine.
Have you ever noticed that synchronicity? Rahn writes about carrying the Dietrich, the skeleton key, and then decades later, it's Rolf Dietrich who brings this whole story to light.
The same man who becomes Major of Division Parsifal in the story, initiated into the House of the Chalice, the man who was supposedly sent to Scotland to retrieve a mystical object.
The star maps in Maier's journals that Rolf showed us. They weren't just navigation tools. They were waypoints, just like Rahn's thieves' path leading to the Rose Garden.
The constellation patterns he documented weren't random. They aligned perfectly with the tunnel systems under the Harz. Our ancestors drank mead in the Rose Garden.
Do you remember Rahn? Der alte und große Vater mochte Honigseim gern. Als Met tranken unsere Urahnen diesen in Rosengarten. You know, the Rose Garden isn't just a place, it's a gateway. Something Rolf tried to tell us almost 20 years ago.
Sounds like you've been doing your own research, beyond what's in the published files.
Let's just say there's a reason my fictional counterpart found her way into your story, Pat. Life imitates art. Or perhaps it's the other way around.
And like Rahn wrote at the end, vielleicht übernachtet es in einer Hagerose und morgen ist ein neuer Tag. Perhaps it spends the night in a wild rose and tomorrow is a new day. The journey continues, generation after generation.
Or what these stories connect. Stories aren't just entertainment. They're maps, they're blueprints, and sometimes they're warnings.
And sometimes they're keys.
And that takes us to our next point. There's something about the Maier Files that just pulls people in. Could be the mystery, could be the history, or maybe it's that weird gut feeling telling you, this isn't fiction we're dealing with.
Exactly. You start reading and before you know it, you're questioning everything. Not just history, but what's happening now. Maybe even questioning who you really are.
And once those questions start, there's no turning back.
Which is why next week, we're diving even deeper into this rabbit hole.
Elferharz.
Episode 11. The hidden tunnel networks, those bizarre artifacts, all those whispers about something buried deep in the Harz Mountains.
And the secrets Otto Maier left behind. What was he really working on? And why were so many forces from both sides desperate to erase it all?
This episode almost never saw the light of day.
But someone made sure it did. Jemand hat dafür gesorgt, wie damals.
Not everything stays buried. Some doors only open when the right hand turns the key. Join us next week. Until then, stay curious.
As we close the pages of the Maier Chronicles, we want to express our deepest gratitude for joining us on this journey into the mysterious and the unknown. If you've been captivated by the enigma, share the intrigue with fellow seekers and leave no stone unturned. Subscribe, rate, and leave your thoughts to keep the conversation alive. Until our next unveiling, may the secrets of the Maier Files continue to inspire curiosity and spark your imagination. And never stop seeking the truth.